Hey guys, so the aim for today's class is what can the story of John Henry teach us about Reconstruction? What is the aim for today's class? So, we're going to start this off by reviewing the five types of media. Then we're going to go into reviewing the John Henry story. Y'all might not remember this, but I actually told you guys this story way back in sixth grade, like the first week of sixth grade. So if it seems familiar, that might be why. And then we are going to look at oral tradition and history. So, real quick, we got the five types of media we talked about earlier this year. The first is oral tradition. That's stories and knowledge passed down by word of mouth, so just storytelling. The next is visual arts. These are statues, paintings, drawings, and other representations. The next was writing. The next was audio recordings. And the final was video recordings. So, this story I'm about to tell you, the story of John Henry, started out as oral tradition, as stories and songs. We're going to look at some of those stories and songs tomorrow, but today we're just going to look at the story and some of the visual arts, some of the pictures people made to go along with it. People have also written this story down, recorded it as a song, like we said, and made movies and videos about it. The Rock is supposed to star in a movie about John Henry at some point soon, like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, the big guy with the eyebrows and all that. But so, anyway, this story is started as oral tradition and has now been recorded using all the other types of media. So, this story happens during Reconstruction, during the time after the Civil War, where formerly enslaved, now free people were trying to get their rights and get what they deserved as American citizens, while their former masters were doing everything they could to make sure nobody got any extra rights, and the US Army kind of stood in the middle trying to keep some sort of peace. Now, into all of this came two types of guys who took advantage of the situation. Because remember, everyone's on edge, everyone's ready to fight, and the whole country's broken up after the whole war. And these two types of people come in: carpetbaggers and scallywags. Now, a carpetbagger was someone from the north. They came down to the south after the war to try and make some money. And they were called carpetbaggers because they carried all their belongings in suitcases made out of carpets. Why was a carpetbagger called a carpetbagger? And when a carpetbagger got down south, they would work with scallywags. Now, scallywags, they were people who were from the south but were willing to work with carpetbaggers to make a quick buck while being unfair to all their neighbors. So, carpetbaggers were people from the north who were taking advantage of people during Reconstruction, and scallywags were people from the south who were doing that. What's the difference between a carpetbagger and a scallywag? Now, one place all of this was happening was the Appalachian Mountains. The thing about the Appalachian Mountains is they had a lot of different people living there because, as you can see, it's a great place to go and hide. It's kind of away from everything. And some of those were maroon communities. Now, Maroons were people of African descent who had escaped from slavery, but instead of running away to Canada or to the north, they had decided to build their own towns. And towns like this existed across the Americas. They were always somewhere like the Appalachians, somewhere far away where they would be harder to find, harder to mess with. Because if you or your grandparents were a runaway slave, you're not trying to get caught and taken back again. And the place we're looking at is one of these maroon communities up in the mountains. Now, this one community we're looking at was in West Virginia. West Virginia was one of the border states, one of those states that stayed in the Union during the Civil War, so fought against the Confederates, even though they were a southern state. And those Appalachian Mountains that run through West Virginia, on one of those mountains, there were two towns near each other. One was a maroon community, and the other was a white settlers town that was near it. And these two towns, they didn't always get along. They kind of respected each other, didn't mess with each other. They traded with each other. They worked things out. Now, both of these towns had a problem, and that was tough times and progress. Because both of these towns made most of their money by selling things to travelers. And travelers used to come in these big wagons. They'd come through, take roads through the mountains. They would need guides. They would need food. They would need places to sleep. But then the war happened. And the war messed up business for everybody because no one's traveling during a war. No one's trying to stay at a hotel during a war. Like, it's just a war. Everyone's just trying not to die. And when the war ends, technology has moved on. And these wagons, they've been replaced by trains. And the trains, they don't need to sleep in hotels at night. They don't stop and buy and sell things the same way the wagons do. They just go, 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 go. And everywhere across the country, they're building railroads now. And that's where we come back to these guys, our antagonists, the bad guys in our story. Carpetbagger Charlie and Scallywag Steve. Now, they come to this mountain with the two towns and they tell them, listen, times are moving on and we'll give you jobs working to build a railway. And most of the town, they need jobs, so they know that these two are scumbags. They don't trust either of them, but they take the job building the railway. And these guys, the thing is, they're not just building a railway on flat ground, they're building it in the mountains. So they're going to need to build a tunnel straight through the middle of the mountain. If you lived in this community in one of these two towns on the mountain, would you have taken a job from these two guys? Why or why not? So, our protagonist, the hero of our story, his name's John Henry. And he doesn't have a choice. He needs money, he needs to feed his family, so he takes a job. And he's respected in both towns, in both the white town and the maroon community. And he got that respect by being the strongest, hardest working guy around. Everyone knew John Henry. Everyone knew he'd help you out in a jam, and everyone knew that if you worked on his team, he would take care of you and make sure you got home safe at the end of the day. And in that town, in both those towns on the mountain, that was enough to get him respect. Why did people respect John Henry? So John Henry's job was to tunnel through the mountains. And this was back before bulldozers, before backhoes, before any of that. So to get through the mountain, you would take a sledgehammer like this and a little chisel like this. And one guy would hold the chisel, that was called the shaker. The shaker would hold the chisel, and the steel driver That was John Henry's job, would swing this big sledgehammer down over his head onto the chisel. And they would keep doing that till they made a little hole in the rock at the end of the tunnel. Then they'd put in a piece of dynamite, the little hole in the rock at the end of the tunnel, back up a bit, and boom, blow up the dynamite. And the goal was to blow up enough rock that you could pull it out and the tunnel would get a little bigger. But there was a big danger here of cave ins, of the tunnel falling down on top of them and killing everyone in there. And the reason everyone wanted to be on John Henry's crew was because if there was a cave in the tunnel and John Henry was there, he pulled you out and you got out alive. What did John Henry protect his crews from? Now, our two buddies, Carpetbagger Charlie and Scallywag Steve, show back up. And Carpetbagger Charlie, he brought in a new machine. It was a big honking steam powered drill that he said could drill through the mountain faster than any man. And he looked around it and he told people on both sides of the mountain in both towns, you know what? We don't need you anymore. We can drill through the mountain on our own. This is going to be easy. Now, John Henry didn't take that too kindly. He went up to the bosses and he said, you can't put everyone out of work. This isn't fair. We work harder than the machine. We work better. If you bring that machine in, it's going to cause cave in after cave in after cave in. It's going to kill whole crews by shaking this mountain too much. It's too big. It's going to cause cave ins. Why did John Henry not want them to use the machine? Thing is, the bosses, they don't listen to John Henry. They're like, man, you just try to save your job. You're just messing around. And he goes, you know what? I am trying to save my job, and I'll be honest with you. I can work harder. I can work faster than that machine. They look at him and they're bored. And the carpetbagger gets an idea to make some money. So he says, why don't we have a race? You against the machine. Whoever tunnels further wins. We'll let everyone in the town bet on it. And if you win, we let you keep your jobs and keep working. If the machine wins, you know what? Then you have to work for cheap. Less money, more work. John Henry looks at him. He says, all right, you got a deal. Do you trust the bosses to keep their word? If John Henry wins the bet, do you think the carpetbaggers and the scallywags will keep their deal and let him and his friends keep their jobs? Now, for those of you who said you didn't trust him, guess what? You're not the only one. Because John Henry, he had a wife. Her name was Polly Ann. And Polly Ann thought that John Henry was being a fool. She became his wife because she was the only one smarter and stronger than him. And he knew it. So when she told him, John, don't do it. Don't play this game. It's not going to work out. They're playing you, they're lying to you, they're using you like entertainment and they're going to leave you there. They're not going to let you keep this job. It doesn't matter what you do. And he said to her, I got to try. I got to try cuz I need to protect my job. I need to protect my friends. It's the only option I got left. And she looked at him and said, you don't need to do it alone. Get someone to help you. Get the town to help. Get both towns to help. And he goes, they're too beat down. They're too tired. I'm the only one who do it. I got to do it alone. And Polly storms off. And she goes to both towns and asks everyone, will you help? Like, all we got to do is chase these goons out of town. There's a few of them. They might have a machine, but there's more of us. We can chase them out of town. And everyone in the town, what do you think they say? Yeah, they say, Polly, we're sorry. We're tired. We're beat down. John wants to try and fight. John can try and fight, but the rest of us, we're done. So Polly gives John a hug, a kiss, and he heads off to the competition. Now, John and the steam drill start tunneling next to each other to see who can tunnel faster. And as they go, John Henry pulls out in the lead. The thing is, the bosses aren't going to play fair. So they start turning up the smoke on the steam drill, throwing on wet wood to make it smoke even more and more and more. And they send all the smoke into the tunnel that John Henry's working in. He keeps swinging the hammer, but every swing, he's breathing in the smoke and he can feel it in his lungs. But even as the smoke clogs the air so you can't see anything else, when the hammer hits steel, the one swung by the machine or by the man, you saw a spark. And when the machine's hammer hit the steel, it was a little spark, just a little blip, blip, blip. When John Henry hit the steel, a spark lit up the whole tunnel. So who do you think is swinging the hammer harder, John Henry or the machine? Why? Now the contest keeps going. The machine keeps going. John keeps going, and eventually he picks up two hammers and just starts swinging away, swinging away. He's coughing through the smoke and the fog, and finally they hear the bell. And when they measure, John Henry's tunnel has gone further than the machine by 10 yards. John Henry, he's lying in the tunnel and he's not moving. He's coughing up smoke. Someone yells, bring him water, and someone else yells, forget the water, go get Polly. So they go and get Polly, and she holds John as he coughs his last breath. And the whole town is quiet, looking at the only man among them who was willing to stand up and do anything for him. And Polly turns to the carpetbaggers and the scallywags and says, so, you gave your word. Are you going to do what you said? And they go, well, we'll see. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, maybe. And they hear a click. And they turn around and see both towns standing there with guns drawn. Because the thing I forgot to tell you about Appalachian towns, there are more guns than people in these towns. When I used to go to West Virginia in high school, if you went into any store there was about a 50% chance that store would be selling guns to this day. And back then it was even more. The town looks at the carpetbaggers and the scallywags. Pollyann smiles and says, I think it's time for you gentlemen to get out and get off this mountain. And the carpetbaggers and the scallywags go, leaving the towns to make their own money, finishing the tunnel themselves. Now, Pollyann, she was remembered pretty well, but the person the town really remembered was John Henry, the guy who had inspired them to see that they could stand up, that maybe there was a way to beat the bosses, maybe there was a way to keep their town for themselves. And to this day, standing outside of the tunnel that he died to help build, near the towns that he's helped save, is a statue of John Henry. All right, before we go any further, do you think this story is real or fake, and why? So here's the deal. That story is what we call a tall tale. It means there's a little bit of truth to it and a lot of changes, embellishment. So here's the parts that are true. Reconstruction was really a time of major change. Carpetbaggers and scallywags were both real. Maroon communities really existed across the Americas. So there really were escaped people of African descent who started their own towns across the Americas. In the United States, they weren't often in mountains, more of them were found in swamps, but a few were in mountains. So that's how they ended up in this story. Railroads really were being built at this time, and new machines were really replacing workers. Finally, and this was the part of the story I added in. Usually, the carpetbaggers and scallywags don't get chased out of town at gunpoint, but I added that in because isolated communities have chased outsiders away from southern towns. In 1958, the town of Hayes Pond, North Carolina, had the KKK try and march through their town, and they chased the Klan out of their town with hunting rifles and pitchforks. So there really were majority minority towns in the South who chased people out of town who tried to take advantage of their towns. And finally, that statue is real. Whether the story of John Henry is real or fake, nobody really knows. But that story inspired enough people that they really built a statue of him outside of the Big Bend Tunnel in West Virginia. So that's it. Did you like the story? Yes or no?